Coming. My name is Weili Lee. I am a program manager with the SQL Server Group. My team develops a tool called SQL Server Migration Assistant, or SSMA. This is a tool that, first of all, how many of you knows SSMA? Oh, very good. Welcome. For those of you who are not familiar with it, this is a tool that you can use to automate migration from non-SQL Server to SQL Server. Why do you need such a tool? Well, before I joined Microsoft, I was a database consultant. A lot of my clients have an environment in such that they have every type of database product running. Oracle, SQL Server, IBM. Some organizations have such environment by choice because they want to take advantage of different features in the different products. Others, on the other hand, have such environment because they have no choice. And there could be several reasons. The most popular reason is that they have a third-party application that only supports certain database products. Number two reason, and this is my favorite one, is that they may have this legacy application whose developer already left the company and nobody seems to know what's going on with this database. Or there could be another reason. You might have someone who knows this database. What you don't have is their time. It takes a lot of effort to migrate from one database product to the other. And this last two reasons is where SSMA can help you. The tool can diagnose a database that you want to migrate over, provide you a report, what's inside the database, and how difficult it is to migrate to SQL Server. And then the tool can automate the migration. Even in the case where you have a third-party application, then you might want to tell your software vendors about SSMA. I'm currently working with one of the ERP software vendors to extend their support from Oracle to SQL Server by migrating their database using SSMA. So that is what we're going to talk today, is how do you migrate this non-SQL Server to SQL Server. And when I said non-SQL Server, that includes Microsoft products such as Access Database. My goal for this session is that by the end of this session, I'll be able to migrate you, convert you to become SSMA expert. As a matter of fact, next week, when you go back to your organization and someone asks you, what did you learn at TechEd? I want the first answer from you is that I know how to migrate the database. And if by the end of this hour, you're still not comfortable to migrate the database, come to see me. And we spend all night if we have to. So we have a lot of things to cover, so let's get started. Let's talk briefly about why migrate to SQL Server. I'd like to share with you what some of our customers say about the benefit of migration. A lot of them mention about cost saving. This is especially true when you're migrating from products such as Oracle to SQL Server. On top of that, not only the cost saving from the licensing, for example, but a lot of customers also report that they've seen a better performance, better availabilities after they move to SQL Server. And in the case for MySQL, then a lot of customers migrate because they want to scale more with SQL Server. So how do you migrate? So these are some of the steps that our customers follow when they're going through database migration project. The first is database discovery, is to identify the database that you want to migrate over. And sometimes this can be very easy task, especially if you have a smaller IT environment. But for a bigger IT, sometimes discovery itself might be challenging, and I have some tool that I can recommend you. Once you identify the database that you want to migrate over, then the next thing is for you to determine how difficult it is to migrate this database and perform impact assessment. Once you decided to move ahead, then you can convert the schema. And when I said schema, that not only refer to like tables, but also business logic inside your database. That includes your store procedures, your function, everything that you built into the database. Once you move that over, then you migrate the data. After that, then you're not finished. You need to do what we call application remediation. Database is rarely stand on its own. There's usually application that's connecting to the database. Once you move to database, then you need to repoint all this application to the new server. And not only that, but sometimes a lot of these applications have embedded SQL inside their application source code. Sometimes those statement works across the products, sometimes doesn't. And for those that will break, then you have to change those statements to works in the new server. Lastly, you do this application development, everything is ready, then you need to create your users in the new server and set up their access control. A lot of these tasks are something that you can use SSMA to automate. Even in the case for database discovery, then we have another tool called Microsoft Assessment and Planning Toolkit, or MAP tool. This is a tool that you can run on your IT environment, and it provides you a report of what's inside your environment. And that includes discovery of Oracle, MySQL, as well as Sybase. I believe that we have hands-on lab on how you can run a MAP tool. If you like to know more about this, then you can go to microsoft.com/map, where not only get the information, but you get the tool for free. But now let's talk about SSMA, and it's easier to show you rather than to explain. So let me just switch to the demo. Once you download and install the tool, then you will get this icon on your desktop. And when you launch it, the first thing you need to do is to create a migration project. Then you specify where do you want to migrate this to. I'm going to choose Denali. Then you connect to the source database that you want to migrate over. At this time, then the SSMA connect to the database, collect the schema information from that database, and then load it into your local machine. You will be able to browse the different schema in that database. So let's say that you want to migrate this schema called Prosware. To do that, then you highlight Create Reports. When you get the report, there are a few things in this report. One thing you want to pay attention is this conversion rate on the top. So this basically tells you is that SSMA is able to convert 99.39% of all the object and statement inside this schema. Table on the right gives you a breakdown based on the object type. So on the top here, for those of you in the back might not be able to read, this tells you that there are 3 user-defined functions in this Oracle schema, one of which SSMA is not fully able to convert those to SQL Server. And I'll explain in a moment what I meant by fully convert them. On the left, then there is this tree structure where you can browse for those objects in which SSMA is not able to convert. Then you have this X symbol. When you click on it, it will give you side-by-side comparison. What is the original source statement and what it looked like after you convert to SQL Server. And notice that when SSMA encounter a problem with this function, it doesn't just tell you this function has problem, but it actually goes to the specific lines in that function where it found some problems. So in this case, we have line number 6 and line 9 to 11. And for those statements, then SSMA generate this conversion message, what we call error message, near the where the that particular statement is in the converted source code. In the bottom, you also get to see the list of the different errors. SSA may generate 3 types of conversion messages. There is an error in which this is something that the tool not able to convert, so you have to fix them to complete the migration project. But there are also another one that we call warning. This is an instance where SSMA is able to convert, but because of the difference between Oracle and SQL Server, you might get slightly different results. So in this case, we have Oracle substring function, which we converted to SQL Server substring, but Oracle implements substring slightly differently. For example, you can put negative position in your substring, which will count from the right to the back, which is not something that's supported in SQL Server. So although the function is converted, depending how you call the function, then it might not give the same result as SQL Server. So in that type of situation, we issue a warning inside the converted statement. Now, let's go back to the error. Notice that for each error, not only we give you this list of error and the link to the object, but we also give you estimated time for an average DBA to fix this problem. And we also give you an aggregate numbers on the top. So typically, customer see this percent conversion and manual conversion time number to make a decision whether or not to go ahead with the migration, as well as to plan how much time they need to set aside for their resources to complete the migration project. So let's say that you decided to go ahead with the migration. Then the next thing is to connect to the SQL Server. If you don't mind to hold the question till the end. And once you connect to the SQL Server, if the database doesn't exist, then it prompts you whether you want to create one. Then you also be able to see the list of the schema. So in order to convert, then you highlight the schema, then click this Convert Schema. Notice in the bottom that you also get the similar error list that you see before, and you can click on it, and it will take you to the specific object where it found some problems. So there are 2 ways for you to fix the problem. You can fix it at the source statement level, or you can fix it after it gets converted. So let's take a look at this function. This is a simple function where it calculates the time between a person is hired until the today's date. Now in Oracle, they have this data type called interval data type to calculate the difference between the 2 date time. SQL Server doesn't support this interval type. So that's why we generate this conversion error message. So one way to do that is to change the data type. Let's say change it to number. Now, when I make these changes only apply locally. So because when we connect to Oracle, we pull all the schema, store it in the local machine. So this doesn't actually change your Oracle production database. Now that you change the data type into something more standard, you can reconvert for this particular object only. And now notice that this error, first of all, the error disappeared, and the return types changed to float 53. Now, how does SSMA knows how to convert number? The answer is this type mapping tab on the top. By default, SSMA map Oracle data type to the equivalent SQL Server data type. But you can modify this type mapping. And we provide you some flexibilities in how you want to modify this type mapping. For example, you can modify the type mapping at the argument level, namely all the input and output parameters to this function, or you can specify the type mapping for local variables that you define inside this function, or you can change, in our case, the return value type mapping. Once you select that, then you look for this number, and now it's mapped to float 53, and you can click this edit, and it will allow you to change that mapping. So let's say we change to integer. After we do that, let's reconvert. Now it changed to int. You can make this type mapping at the object level or at the object type level, meaning that it will apply to all functions in this schema, or you can also make the type mapping at the schema level. So this will apply against all kind of objects, procedures, function, trigger, and so on. In the case where you are migrating multiple Oracle schema into SQL Server, then you can also define this at the project level. So you go to the tool, go to project setting, and do this type mapping, and you will be able to do the mapping there. The project setting is also where you can specify the different options that are available for you when you do the database migration. So let's come back to this particular function. We have fixed one error, but there's still another error. So this error is related to this expression to calculate the interval times. Now, notice that when SSMA encounter some problems that is not able to convert, then rather than blocking the whole thing, then it commented out that expression and then replace it with something generic. So in this case, it will replace it with null. So this allows this particular function to still be created in SQL Server and allow you to come back later on and fix it in SQL Server. So in our case, let's fix it here. SQL Server doesn't have the interval type, but there is one function to calculate the difference between two times. Let's say we want to return the month difference between the hire date and then today's date. Now that we have fixed it, then we can remove this comment. Now we're ready to deploy. We don't actually, if you fix it at the converted statement, we don't actually remove the error list. Save changes, and then right-click on the database and synchronize with SQL Server. Before you do that, then it provides you with a diff report between what is in the local metadata in your local machine and then what is in the target SQL Server. So it's going to go ahead and deploy all those objects. Now that let me refresh this. We have this database, and let's go take a look. Notice that in addition to the tables that we brought over from Oracle, there are also some additional tables that SSMA created that's prefixed with $SSMA. And for those of you who are familiar with Oracle, this is how we convert Oracle sequence generator. In Oracle, you can create these standalone objects to generate a running number. It's kind of similar with the identity column in SQL Server, but the difference is that rather than bind it to specific table, it is a standalone sequence number generator that the values you can use across multiple tables. And SQL Server doesn't have this, so in order for us to simulate this Oracle sequence, what we did is to create a table for each sequence in Oracle, as well as stored procedures. So these stored procedures, when called, going to insert a value inside that table and then returns the inserted value back as an output procedures. So for instance, then you can run this statement, and every time you run it, then you will have the next number. So let's go back to our SSMA project. Now that we have converted the schema, we can migrate the data. To do that, then select the schema. enter your credential. At this time, SSMA take a snapshot of your data and then brought it over to SQL Server and give you reports in terms of the number of rows that it's brought over to SQL Server. So if you go back here and execute, then you see that the data now is in SQL Server. I mentioned earlier that you can also use SSMA to help you with the application remediation. So sometimes you have this statement that is embedded inside the application source code. So such statement might be something like this one. So what you can do is that you can copy that statement and then paste it inside your SSMA. There is a node called statements, and you can add ad hoc statements, paste that in, and then as we did before, right-click and convert. So this generates the converted SQL Server statement. Now this statement in Oracle, the connect by, is essentially their syntax for hierarchical queries. In SQL Server, we don't have such syntax, but we have this CTE, or Common Table Expression, to do hierarchical queries. So SSMA convert this simple statement into a CTE format. And you can then copy this and then paste it back to your application. In our case, I just paste it back to Management Studio, run, and then you will get same results as it were in Oracle. Now that you have converted the schema as well as migrate the data, you might want to do some testing to validate whether you have migrated your database correctly or not. And you can use SSMA to do the testing, to help you to do the testing. To do that, you can define new test cases inside SSMA. You can select what object you want to test. So in this case, then we want to test this particular function. This function takes order ID and returns the sales values. And you can also specify what order ID you want to test this function. You can enter multiple input values. And let's say you also want to test these particular procedures to add employees into the employee tables. And you can put some name, click next. This next step is for you to specify what underlying table to test. Let me explain how SSMA tester works. So the way that it works is that it executes the procedures or function you want to test against the source database, and then run the same procedures or function in the converted database with the same calling values. So the idea is that the return value should be the same, but not only that, if the procedures, for example, make changes to the underlying table, then we also do compare between the table in the source and the table in the target after the execution of the procedures to make sure that they're also identical. So this is the step that we do here, is to specify what underlying table we want to compare. So in comparing this table, not only that, by default, it will compare all the columns in the table, but you can exclude some columns that you don't need to be validated. Even for those that you want to compare, you can specify the precision. So for example, in the hire date, we only want to compare dates, and we don't really care about whether it's, say, millisecond. The next step is for you to specify the order. We have two objects to test. Then if, let's say, you want to run the function first before the procedures, so this is where you can specify the sequence. The last step is where you can specify different options. One of the options is for SSMA to automatically roll back any changes. So when you execute the store procedures that insert a row into your table, this is a test data. And you don't want the test data to be laying there after the test complete. So you can set the option for SSMA to roll back any changes made to the tables. So now you finish. At this time, you're only creating test cases. So the test cases has been defined, and you can run it multiple times. In this case, let's run it. SSMA provides a warning if the tables that you want to compare doesn't have a row ID. Now, when it comparing the table, it is smart enough rather than comparing the whole thing in that table, because the table might be huge, might have millions of records. So it keeps track on what specific rows get impacted by your test cases. In order to do that, then it needs to have a row identifier in the table. If it doesn't find a row identifier, then it will temporarily add one during the test and then remove it after the test completes. This provides a warning. Now that we have completed the test, we can see the reports. So in this case, when we run this function, the source value, in this case an Oracle, returns 1746.2, the same value that we get when we run this in SQL Server. For stored procedures, we get the reports that all the result cells are equal between the source and the target. So in summary, I show you how to use SSMA to perform migration assessment. Then we convert the schema, migrate the data, and finally we do testing. In the demo, I show you how to migrate from Oracle database. But SSMA support migration from Oracle Sybase MySQL as well as Access database. Each has a separate tool, but the steps are the same across the different database. Now, these tool sets are really something, and the credit goes to the developer who built the tool. One of the developers' name is Dennis. Brilliant man, and one of the smartest person that I have the pleasure to work with. But one thing about Dennis is that he can get quite upset if he heard someone refer SSMA as search and replace tool. So next time, if you visit me at Microsoft, I introduce you to someone named Dennis, you know what not to say. But he's right, because SSMA is much more beyond than just searching for a specific string and replace it with something else. The tool actually do full parsing of all the statements inside your schema. That is to solve database migration problem. And they are actually a hard problem when you're migrating one database to the other. Let me explain. So let's take example of the Oracle database that we migrate over to SQL Server. There are a few things that are similar between the database. Each has table, each has procedures, and so on. But there are a few things that are different. They're unique to Oracle. We talk about sequences. There's also Oracle packets, which at the very, very simplest term is the way to group related procedures and functions together in Oracle. So those are not something that SQL Server support natively. So how do we solve this problem? We first convert an object to an equivalent one, or as close as possible, in SQL Server. And then we create them into the database that you specify. For the others, in which there is no equivalent one, then we try to map it to the native object. So in the case of sequence, we create it with the table and procedures. Packets, then we actually break it into individual procedures and function. But there are other things than in Oracle in which there simply doesn't have an equivalent, and we cannot use a workaround with the native object. So we create an emulator. And this emulator is something that we push to its own database called sysdb. And they are also something that we push to MasterDB. But even in the case where you try to convert something that looks similar, in the case of procedures, function, and triggers, sometimes the conversion between one database product to the other is not a straightforward process. Let me give you a quick demo of what I meant. Oops, what happened here? So let's go back to the SSMA project. Then we see that there is these procedures called getEmployee. For those who are in the back, they might not be able to read this, but this is very simple procedures that takes employee ID and then go to employee records and pull the rows in which the employee ID is the same as the input parameters. But one thing that is different between Oracle and SQL Server in terms of how to implement the procedures is that in Oracle, you don't return data sets from your procedures. So for instance, you cannot have written these procedures to be something like this. Instead, in Oracle, you have to put the values into a variable and then pass the variable as an output parameters from your stored procedures. But in the case where you are querying a table with multiple columns, then Oracle has this record type. When you declare it, this essentially says that goes to employee table. This variable contains all the columns in that employee tables. And when you select, then you can select into this variable, and this variable then pass on as an output parameters. So this record type concept doesn't exist in SQL Server. So how do we migrate them? So let's take a look. When SSMA encounter record types, what it does is that it breaks the variables into every single columns in the underlying table. So it will generate separate variables. And when it does select, then it will put the values into the corresponding variables, and then the variable then passed it out as an output to that stored procedures. So that is how SSMA solve the problems with the record types. What about function? We have this function in Oracle that to return inventory status based on the unit in stock and reorder level. It's very straightforward. You take those two numbers, divide them, and then calculate the ratio. Based on the ratio, then returns some status, green, yellow, red. So SSMA is able to convert this into user-defined function in SQL Server. Now, the heart of this function is this ratio, where you divide the two numbers. Now, I know that the developer in you probably asking, okay, what happened when the reorder level is 0? Right? We need to trap this error. So you might be tempted to put this into a try-catch block, into something like this. And then I have to put end catch. And let's see that I change this into alter. So who can tell me what happened if I try to execute this in SQL Server? You're shaking your head. You think this will work or not? Why not? Okay, very good. So after the session, please come to see me. I have some backpack for you. So he's right that there is some problem with this, and then let's try to run it. When you run this, then SQL Server complained that saying that you cannot put try-catch in the UDF. It's not supported. But in Oracle, you can put exception handler in the function. So let's go back, and let's copy this thing. Let's go back to the Oracle. Let's suppose, pretend that your source function looks something like this. This is a valid statement in Oracle. So what happened when SSMA tried to convert this? So let's give it a try. Let's take a look at the converted statement. Oh, look, there's a try-catch. So what happened? Does SSMA make a mistake, or this error, this code will compile in SQL? What is that? If there was a mistake, very good. So if you notice, SSMA convert this to procedures. This function into procedures, where in procedures, store procedures in SQL Server, you don't have this limitation. You can put the try-catch inside your procedures. But you're converting function to store procedures. That function might be used inside select statement. So what happened then? Ah, you're a smart man. You'll just win another bag, so come to see me. So as this gentleman says, that if you go back, then there is still a function called inventory status, and this function is actually a wrapper for you to call the other store procedures. Now, there's actually, I'm going to talk a little bit later, but there is some reason why that is the case. And those limitations are there mostly for a performance reason. And I'm kind of cheating a little bit, because actually you cannot call store procedures from user-defined function. So this is where our emulator comes to play, because you can see that this is actually calling extended store procedures. You can execute extended store procedures from UDF. And we call the extended store procedure, pass in the procedures, and that is how you're able to call the procedures. Let's talk about trigger. This is my favorite subject. And this is another chance for you to win a bag as well. So pay attention. So we have these two triggers in Oracle for the products table. The first trigger is very common. Then before you do any insert, then you want to log it and then insert the old and new values to the products underscore audit table. So that is one trigger. The other triggers is to calculate the reorder level, and then by dividing units in stock by half. So who can tell me what is the challenge in migrating these two triggers to SQL Server? What is that? Old and new value. Correct, because in SQL it's actually inserted and deleted. Come to see me, you got another bag. What else? Yes? Excellent. The before insert. There is no such thing in SQL Server as before insert. It doesn't exist. The closest thing that you can find in SQL Server is instead of triggers. And there's slight difference between the before trigger and instead of. In before triggers, you try to insert something, then the trigger intercept, do something in the triggers, comes back, and proceed with the actual insert. In the instead of triggers, before that happens, trigger intercept, it never come back. So your value never get inserted with instead of triggers. So there's some slight changes. There's another problem with the instead of, well, I should say no problem, but there's a limitation with the instead of triggers, is that you can only have one instead of triggers per table, per action, namely one for insert and one for update. But in our case, both of these triggers are before insert. So even if we convert them to, instead of triggers, there are two of them. SQL only support one. So what happened? So let's take a look. So if you go to these tables and see under the products, under triggers, then there's only one triggers. But if you go inside these triggers, then see, then these triggers actually combine the two logic from the original two triggers together. So this particular line of code is to insert into product audits table, which referred to these triggers, and then the one on the bottom is the next one is to calculate the reorder level. So SSMA is smart enough to combine those two logic together, and not only that, then if you scroll down to the bottoms, that it also take the original insert and then append it at the bottom to simulate the before insert, because otherwise if you do this, then it never actually do the actual insert. So that is how SSMA solved the problem with the triggers. So all of this migration challenge is something that SSMA take care for you, and for the most part, you don't have to worry about them and let SSMA handle them. But there are a few things that you should pay attention when you do the database migration. First is you want to take advantage of the different options available for you. I show you briefly how to go to the project setting. There are 65 different configuration options when you migrate from Oracle. When we have this tool, everything is already set to optimize for the most common scenario. But you might have some specific business requirements that want to be slightly different, and this is where you can tune the different options that's available for you for the database migration. The second is customize your data type mapping. Again, SSMA provides the default, but you want to take advantage of the native data type in SQL, like money or in. This is something that is not available in Oracle, and SQL is much more efficient in saving those values in those data type. You also want to use the smallest possible data type. When SSMA convert one column or one variable to the other, it tries to play it safe, so that it tries to pick a range to minimize possibilities that there will be a value loss. But sometimes we pick something that's too large. If you know your data and you know that it's not exceeding certain number of characters for your var card, for example, then you can set the appropriate size for your type mapping. The last one is re-engineer your code. So I always like to think about database migration is like you are trying to translate one language to the other. I started my career right after college to become a consultant. And I remember my very first project was this international project for a local client in Indonesia. My very first assignment was to translate this presentation by my team member from another country to this local client. They picked me because I'm a fresh meat and I'm the only one that can speak to the two languages. But for those of you who speak multiple languages, you know that it is how challenging it is to translate something on the fly. And when I first tried to do that, then I tried to translate word by word. And you know that it's not working very well, and the result can be a little bit awkward. So I changed tactic and tried to understand, okay, what is the message that this person trying to say, and try to rephrase them and then use as much as local reference as possible. And that's how I think about database migration is. Unfortunately, in order for you to be effective in those language translation, then you need to know the purpose. And this is where SSMA has limited information about what you're trying to do. It doesn't have information about how your application consuming your database, for example. And that's why you cannot pick the best optimal way. The closest it can do in most cases is to do this word-by-word translation, which sometimes not very optimal. Like, for example, the procedures example. SSMA translated using output parameters like it was in Oracle, but you know that there is a better way in SQL Server. Don't use output parameters, just return as is. So those are things that you want to look into the pattern and then optimize your converted code. The other thing is about the function. There is a SQL Server MVP. Her name is Kimberly Tripp. And she just started this blog series that is titled, "Just because you could doesn't mean that you should." So that is the thing about in Oracle, in user-defined function, essentially you can do almost anything that you can do with the procedures. And some DBA get carried over by doing a lot of this complex stuff inside the function. But the limitation is there for a reason. You don't want to run a complex UDF, included as part of select statement, run it against a table with millions lines of code. You'll be there waiting forever for this query to complete. So for those type of complex operation, SSMA already convert them into procedures, but you still have to do some work for all the statements that are calling those functions to make sure that they are called properly as stored procedures, not as function. And we just released SSMA 5.0 last month. There are a few new enhancements that we include in this new release. The first is supporting migration to SQL Denali. Support for multi-thread data migration. 1 week after we released this tool, I get an email from customers that they said they compared the data migration in SSMA, previous version of SSMA 4.2, it takes 8 hours to migrate the data. With SSMA 5.0, they cut it out with 1 hour, just because of the multi-thread. We also support the extended support for globalization, meaning that now SSMA can convert all the database object that contains the non-ASCII characters. Discovery of the Oracle user-defined type. Oracle has this type or user-defined type in which you can create an object type or a collection type. Very complex stuff, and we don't support this in SQL Server. So what we do is that we report if the Oracle schema contain this user-defined type. And lastly, we do a bunch of migration enhancement in Sybase. I include this as part of the appendix, so if you can download the slide deck afterward, then you'll be able to get the complete list, as well as in our websites. One of the enhancements that we did was, for this release, is support from migrating from Sybase directly to SQL Azure. In the previous version, we already support direct migration from MySQL as well as Access database straight to SQL Azure. For my last demo, I'm going to give a quick demonstration on how to migrate Access database to SQL Azure. Close this. So for each different database product that you're migrating from, then there's a separate tool. So this is an SSMA for Access. All of them are free. For Access, then we also add this wizard to make it simpler for you to migrate Access database. Then select where you want to migrate to. Notice that now you have a SQL Azure as one of the options. Click Next. Select your Access database. I'm going to pick the famous Northwind. You have the option of migrating tables as well as queries. Queries will be migrated over as views in SQL Server. So click Next. Now you enter your credential in SQL Azure. There is this option to create a link table. I'll explain in a minute. So let's select yes, go click Next. So Access is an interesting application because not only it has this, this is a diff report, not only it has the data component, but Access also contains the UI component as well as some code that you can create in VBA or macro. For the UI, you have these reports, you have these forms to help you to interact with the data. So when we migrate those tables to SQL Server, you have the option to replace the table that you migrate over with link table. So in this case, then when you open your Access, you can still continue using the Access, but now it talks to the backend database that resides somewhere else. And for link table, when SSMA created, then you can also, the best practice is to use the lesser privilege as part of your link table because Access store the credential in a clear text. So let's say that you have different credential. You don't want to use a DBA in your link table, for example. So SSMA also gives you warning that this is going to be stored in Access as a clear text. Go ahead and continue. Okay, no error. So you can go to your Azure, and this is how I create those the other users. It only has a select and update permission. It doesn't have anything else. And when you run this, then you see that the data now already moved to SQL Azure. So let's take a look at the Access database. You open Access database, and you see that there are a bunch of forms, reports, macros, modules. On the top, then there is this table. All these are linked table. Now, the original table is still there, but we rename it with the SSMA $. But now, for the table name, we replace it with the link table. So what happened is that when you open a form, like this one, for example, without needing to do anything, you can still open your form, and let's say that you can make some changes to this data. So Sean, this is where I'm going to borrow your name. So let's say that for this particular company, then we change the contact name to Sean. Let's save it. Now if we go to SQL Azure, notice now the name is Maria. If we run it over, it's Sean. So now you see that in Access, everything still works, but now you talk to the backend SQL Azure. You make your Access database to be more scalable. There's automatic fault tolerance. And maybe the best part is that now that you can go outside your company, go to the customer, and still be able to talk and collaborate with your other team members by talking to SQL Azure. So we not only provide you with tools, we also provide you with some resources to know how you can go to the main SQL Server website, and there are some information, and this is also where you can download the SSMA tool. You pick what you want to migrate. There's some white paper, there's some resources for you, and this is where you can download SSMA. There is also our team blog site where, do you remember that when we convert from Oracle, then it generates some error, conversion error. we provide some guidance as part of the blog post in how, some example on how you can do to, as a workaround to fix those errors. And we also post a video demonstration. So if you want to share what you learned today with some of your colleagues, you can go to our blog site and go to the video. You get a similar demo with the first demo that you saw today. Don't forget your evaluations. I hope that you learned a few things or two about the Oracle. And if you like the session today, please don't be shy with those score of 5. If you don't like it, that's okay. I take 4. And what is that? The rings. Okay, I will do that. Yes. Oh, can you please use the mic?
And SQL is the package and the sequences.
Yes.
So this conversion mainly focus on the database side. So when the application is accessing all this code, like in Oracle package.procedure, they call in the VB code. So how those conversion will happen? Like, the application need to rewrite, or how that is going to change? That's a major concern for.
Yep. It depends on how you write your application. And if your application have a lot of this embedded SQL, if this is like a static statement, then you can do what I showed you in the demo, is copy and then paste that in SSMA to convert. But the challenge is that if this is dynamic SQL, those are something in which you have to spend more time to re-engineer the application source code to make it work with the converted SQL server.
So in another way, like, in my VB code, I'm calling, like, package or
Yep.
procedure
Yep.
1. And, but now the SSMA convert, I saw the names all changed with SSMA
Yep.
something. So the VB code, how that will change? I have to manually change everywhere?
You have to change, yes, unfortunately.
Okay. And second part of the question, the packages, Oracle something called overloaded packages,
Yep.
which means like you can pass the parameter and according to that it will take.
Yep.
So how you will convert those kind of packages?
Okay, excellent question. So in Oracle, in addition to those difference in procedures, one of the things that Oracle also support is this overloading. So you can create the same procedures name, but have the different signatures in terms of the input and output arguments. How SSMA handle those things is that it will create a different version of those procedures with different name, with the different signatures. And then all the statement that, for example, in the package, if you do that, then in the package, in the main statement that you call the procedures, it will change that to the correct procedures name.
So is any blog or any code or anything is available to see how?
No, there is, and I can just give it to you, or you can pick it up after this, but there is this big white paper on how migrate from Oracle, and it talks about some of the things like overloading in the white paper.
And in the beginning you showed 2-3 clients, and
Yep.
those clients, how big is their database and how much actual time it took to convert that?
One of my current clients is they are converting Oracle schema with 16,000 packages. It's a big schema. And I have another customers that they are going through this massive migration project, and their goal is to convert 2,000 Oracle schema, Oracle database to SQL Server, and they run about 200 assessment so far, and the conversion rate is quite good. The average is about 95% for all those 200. But those are varied in range, like sometimes there's a smaller schema, sometimes a bigger schema. If you have a number of Oracle instances, then I suggest that you try with something that with a low-hanging fruit and try to understand what is the process, and then kind of move up to more complex stuff.
Thank you.
Yep.
I have a question about embedded statements.
Yes.
I have done a conversion similar to what you've shown.
Yep.
One of the biggest problems that I had was those statements. It would have been really nice if the tool could either, you could point it to a folder with files or a Visual Studio solution or a VB6 project, and it could analyze and at least put some comments in there and say, this is probably what you should do. Is it something you have been thinking about or you may be able to see in the next version?
We know about this pain point, and we understand about a lot of this effort that needs to be done on the application layer. We currently don't have a tool. There are some partners that have the tools that I understand can do what you just described, but I've never tested myself, but I can give you some names to the partners. Anything else?
Does it go back to older Oracle version, like Oracle 7?
Oracle 7, wow. It's really out of support. Officially, we support migration from Oracle 8, but there are some customers that try to convert from Oracle 7. So you may have to give it a try. It depends on how you create those schema. There might things that might work and might not work. Yes.
The first one is, again, when you said about the schema.
Yeah.
In Oracle, schema concept is different from, I believe in SQL Server.
Correct.
So how, application written using different schemas, and when you convert to SQL Server, is it going to convert as different databases, or how that is going to work?
This is where the project setting options are for. So you have an option. When you convert Oracle schema is kind of similar to the SQL Server database concept. It actually contains the entire thing. So you can have an option in SSMA whether to convert Oracle schema to SQL Server schema or to a SQL Server database with a DBO schema. Now, the trick is that it depends your usage pattern in Oracle. In SQL, for example, you cannot do foreign key relationship with a table in a different database. So if your Oracle schema contains a lot of this foreign key relationship with another schema, then the best is to convert those schema to a schema in SQL Server. But otherwise, you do not have that limitation. It'd probably be better for you to convert to like a DBO in the database. But there is an option in the project setting where you can specify that.
And second question is, again, Oracle have so many system built, the packages.
Correct.
Like
Yep.
UTL file, UTL SNTP
Yep.
and all. So how the migration will handle and how that is going to work?
So all those system functions is actually done through our emulator. So we create those system function standard packages and then create them into a sysdb. So for Oracle, when you install SSMA, there are two components. One is the client component, and one is a server component, which we call extension pack. So when you install that, it's going to create this sysdb into your SQL Server, and this sysdb contains some of the most commonly used standard packages and system function that is not available in SQL Server.
And in this slide, you're showing the sequence is going to procedure as well as a table view. What it sequence do with the procedure?
So in the way that we simulate the sequence is that there is a table, and then the procedures is how we simulate the next val. So we call the procedures try to insert a value into the table, and then take the inserted value out as an output parameters.
So the one sequence become two objects in SQL Server.
Correct.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Very good.
Okay. So in my organization, we have the SQL Server DBAs and the Oracle DBAs.
Yep.
And I'm assuming that it will be the SQL Server DBAs who will be actually running this tool. And let's say we have errors,
Yep.
and they are not able to solve these errors or to actually identify which errors are that. Is it possible to like export all these to files so we can send to the Oracle DBA so they can check that? Or they need to actually also log into the tool and see those errors?
So in the assessment report, you see that there is a source and then the target. Those are actually an HTML file. So you can take that file and then send it over to your Oracle DBA to help you to explain what is it that they're trying to do. But in a typical database migration project, you need to have both the Oracle DBA as well as SQL Server DBA to work side by side, because there are things that we need to understand what is it that they're trying to do in the source in order to be able to convert it properly. Yeah. Yes?
Do you have any customers who have migrated from PeopleSoft schema to SQL Server?
So for ERP application, typically ERP software vendors have their own tools to migrate over, because they, like PeopleSoft, support both SQL Server and Oracle. And a lot of times they have their own tools to do the migration, so that is what we recommend, especially for the PeopleSoft and like SAP. Yes, sir.
What version of Access does it support, like 2003 or?
I have to go back to you. I believe that we support maybe 2000, but I'm not 100% sure. But I have
to. What about SQL migration from like SQL 2000 to Azure? Would that do that or?
So this tool, unfortunately, doesn't do SQL to SQL. It's, we can do from Access, and I believe that we support Access to 2000.
But going from SQL 2000 like to SQL 2010 or?
So that is something that we don't, this tool is only for non-SQL to SQL.
Oh,
yeah. Yes. Thanks, everyone. Please, for those of you who ask questions, please come up and get your bags.